start in 1 more minute. Okay, I think we'll start now. We're going to learn the first sicha of Chelik Yud Zayin. Look at the sicha of Chelik Yud Zayin, Parshas Azriah. Even posik Vayem Hashmini Yimul Psara Losei, on the posik Parshas Azriah, where the Torah says that on the 8th day from when a boy is born, Yimul Psara Losei, you should circumcise the flesh, his foreskin. Darshan and Razal and Terasken and in Gemara, so the Chalchomim, Darshan in Teraskenim, and also in Gemara, that from the word Vayem Hashmini, they learn not Vayem V'lei B'layla, that the bris has to take place during the day and not at night. If it is from this posik of Parshas Azriah that we learn now that you can't do the bris at night, that means that till now there was no such din. So it's mashma here that this whole din was nischadish, was told after Matan Torah. Before Matan Torah, a bris could have been at night. So L'moshel and Avram Avinu or all the other Yidden from Avram Avinu on that did the mitzvah of Milah, they could do it at night. It's only now in Parshas Azriah, which came after Matan Torah, that's when the Eibishter gave this din that you can't do a bris at night. Afilu like dem zweiten Makir from the Medina, Mesichta Shabbos, even according to the second source of this din, which is in Gemara Shabbos. The previous one is in the Gemara Megillah. In the Gemara Shabbos, it says that we learn out, as we learn top, we learn out this din that you can't do a bris at night. We learn it all out from the posik where it says, Uben Shmeinas Yomim, it says, and when he is 8 days old, from that posik we learn out it has to be during the day. Especially the Teisva says that mainly it's from that posik. Now this posik, which also teaches you that you can't do a bris at night, that's in Parshas Lech Lecha, that's by Avram Avinu. So according to that, it would come out that this din that you can't do a bris at night is not from Matan Torah. It's from before Matan Torah. Right away when Hashem told Avram to do a bris, together with that came the halacha that you can't do a bris at night. Still, that's only if it's going to be on the 8th day, because the pasuk says, "Ven shmeinas yomim." So from there we know that when the bris is on its time, the 8th day, then you can't do it at night. But the fact that if you do a bris not in the proper time, which means for whatever reason the child is sick, or whatever reason that you couldn't do it on the 8th day, and you do it later, so that also has to be during the day. Lent manop from the vov from Vayem Hashmini in unser parsha. That we learned from the extra vov where it says Uvayem Hashmini Yimel Psara Losei. So from the extra vov we learn out that a milah shalei bismana cannot be during the night; it has to be during the day. The Teisva is the Smavaya. The Teisva is over there, and Yomis explains it. But mainly the session is chadish geworden nach Matan Torah. So this idea that even the bris that's not on the 8th day cannot be at night, that was told after Matan Torah. Now, dos sumas designed to explain this. In other words, to go in more details in this nakuda. So the Rebbe says yesh lahagdim. You could have to first bring in, introduce was a shteit in Medrash. It says in a few places in Medrash. Many Yidden did not accept upon themselves to do the bris, to do milah. So the Eibishter said they should do the Korban Pesach. Now, when you do the Korban Pesach, the din is that if you're not circumcised, you can't eat from the Korban Pesach. So what did the Eibishter do? He said they should do a Korban Pesach. The Kimish also Meishes when Meishes did his Korban Pesach, the Eibishter decreed that the 4 winds of the world should come and blow the smell of his Korban Pesach. So the winds came and connected themselves to this Korban Pesach. And the smell of the Korban Pesach, the good smell of the Korban Pesach, went throughout the whole Mitzrayim. These council called Yisrael, it's a Moshe, so all the Yidden came to Moshe, and they said to him, we're begging you, give us to eat from your Korban Pesach. The smell of the Korban Pesach brought it within them that they had a desire to eat from it. So he said to them, if you don't do the bris, you will not eat. So right away they did it, they mal themselves. So when did the Eden do this according to this Medrash? From them Medrash come to is, from this Medrash it comes out, as Eden haben sich mal given Beleil Pesach, that the Eden did the bris at night, the night of Pesach. We said before that there's a din that you can't do a bris at night. But here from this Medrash it comes out that at night when Moshe was eating the Korban Pesach, that's when they came and they wanted to eat. The Moshe wouldn't give them because they weren't circumcised, so they circumcised it at night. So it comes out that they did it at night. Nochmer goes further for Medrash, Befrat and Shir Hashem Rabbah for Medrash, especially the way the Medrash is in Shir Hashem Rabbah is mashme. It seems as Moshe Rabbeinu Bechlal mitibri gem to Eden dem tzivu v'chalor lo yechol bei. That Moshe Rabbeinu didn't even give over to the Eden this halacha that if you're not circumcised you can't eat from it. These by Nacht till the night when the Eden seinen gekommen betten by Moshe nach Elonim et Yisbcha. When the Eden came to ask to eat from the Korban Pesach, that's when Moshe told them you have to be mal. That means that not only they didn't circumcise themselves during the day, they didn't even know that they had to do it. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't even tell them that in order to eat from Korban Pesach, they have to circumcise. So Lepela comes out that the whole circumcision that the Eden did before they went on to Mitzrayim was done at night. That's when they found out that they have to do it in order to eat the Korban Pesach. So they found out about it at night, and that's when they did it. Is nicht move, not understood. True. Based on what we said in the beginning of the sicha, that before Matan Torah, you were allowed to, according to one posig ledimud, you're allowed to do before Matan Torah a meal at night. Even according to the other one, if it's a meal shalei bisman, a meal not on the right day, not on the 8th day, also they could have done at night before Matan Torah. Only after Matan Torah they got this halacha. So it comes out that there is no problem how they did the bris in Mitzrayim at night, little the night of Pesach. Nevertheless, as for the tzichober hasbora koponim b'pnimis inyonim. So in halacha there is no shaila. Before Matan Torah there was no halacha; they could do it. But al pichsidis, it's a shaila. What's the shaila? The baldas Eden harbe mehem sich da mal given. Nicht mitzad sich allein, nor mitzad das gozer hakadosh baruch hu l'dal druchas. The fact that the Eden circumcised themselves then, it was not because it was their decision. They decided to do it. So that's what they decided to do it. You can't ask a kasha. They decided to do it at night, and they were allowed to, so they did it at night. But it wasn't that it was their own decision. The Eibishter made it. The Eibishter made the winds come and bring the smell to all the Eden. And because of that, they circumcised. The wind that Hashem sent, Hashem decreed they should come, caused that they should want to eat the Korban Pesach. And that's when they knew that in order to eat the Korban Pesach, they have to go do through Milah, so that's when they were mal. If the Eibishter did it, he could have done the same thing before it got dark, before night. And before night, he should tell them that if you're not circumcised, you can't eat from it. They should circumcise themselves during the day. In other words, it's not a kasha in halacha. In halacha, they were allowed to. But the Rebbe doesn't say the words I'm going to say, but what it means here is, since after Matan Torah, this is something that shouldn't be done, so obviously this is not such a good idea. So even though it was muter al pidin, but since it's something that the Torah later on said you shouldn't do, shows that there's something wrong with it. So if they themselves chose to do it, so they chose to do it, something that's muter, and they chose to do it. But if the Eibishter was the one that made them do it, so why did Taka David should not make it happen during the day, that they should do it during the day? It would have been good, even the way the Torah was given later and said later, because it definitely is better that way. So why didn't David make it happen? There's a commentary, on Shmeis Rabbah, wants to say that he says it's possible that the stake was before it got night. And he brings two proofs why we have to say that it wasn't at night, it was before it got night. Because at night it was Yontif, Pesach. And if it's a milah shalei bismana, if it's not the 8th day, it doesn't push away Yontif, and you can't do bris on Yontif. So how do they do it at night? Because it's Yontif, you can't do it on Yontif. But hey, they milah balayla, and also he says because you can't do it at night. So he says probably it was before it got night. So before it got night, the kasha of the Rebbe is no kasha because the Taka didn't do it at night. The Rebbe said you can't say that pshat. The way the same story is told in Shir Hashirim Rabbah, as I said before, it's in a few places in Medrash. The way it's in Shir Hashirim Rabbah, and the posuk at Shamela bim Sibei is clear. There it's very clear as is given balayla that it was at night, definitely at night. Dort steht befehlish, it says clearly there, das ist vorgekommen at Shamelotum Sibei. This happened when Moshe Rabbeinu was sitting at the Seder, sitting, eating the korban. At Shemeshe v'Yisrael mesubim ve'echlim pischeim v'mitzrayim. Moshe and the Eden were gathered with mesubim, they did a sefer, or they were sitting around by a meal, and they were eating the korban Pesach. Unachilas Pesach, the balayla azeh. The korban Pesach you can only eat at night. Like it says in Pasuk, balayla is a baleil tesvov, it's no nit kedem chashecha. You only can eat the korban Pesach at night, when it gets night, the 15th day of Nisan at night, but not before dark. So, and there it says clearly it was when he's eating the korban Pesach, so the meal did not take place before it got dark. When the Tzveyach Reichen was bring, he brings two proofs that it couldn't be at night, it had to be before. What are the two proofs? Number one, Mila Shleib is Manis Nedecha Yontiv. If the meal is not on the 8th day, not the proper time, you can't do it on Yontiv. Second thing, Ein Molim Balaylo. You can't do it at night. So that's why he says it couldn't be at night. That doesn't prove that it happened before. While number one like this, because the second raya he brings that it can't be at night because it's at night you're not allowed to do a breeze. That's no raya because of these four matan Torah, and we said in the beginning of the sicha that this whole din that you can't do it at night is only after matan Torah, and before matan Torah you could do it. So it's no raya. So how could you bring a raya that it wasn't at night because you don't do it at night? At that time you could do it. And the second thing, the second thing we could also answer. What was the second thing? He wrote it as the first, but the Rebbe explains it as the second. The other raya is that it was yontiv. At night is yontiv. You can't do a bris on yontiv. If it's shalei bismana, you only could do a bris on yontiv on the 8th day, but not if it's another time. This was not the zman of the 8th day of the milah, so they couldn't do it at night. I mean yontiv. So the Rebbe says, we don't find that Mitzrayim, the year they left Mitzrayim, when it was test of Nisan, there was no Isser Malacha. That day was the day we celebrate Pesach all the years later, but that year it was not forbidden to do a Malacha. The reason you cannot do a bris is because a bris is a Malacha. So on the 8th day, the Torah says you should do it, even though it's Yom Tov or Shabbos. But if it's not on that day, you can't do it. Why? Because it's a Malacha. And the Torah doesn't say it pushes away Shabbos or Yom Tov, so you can't do it. But that's only if there was a Isser Malacha, if it was forbidden to do Malacha. But it seems like that on Pesach, Tesvav Nisan, in the year that they went out of Mitzrayim, that year there was not Osir B'Malacha. It wasn't forbidden to do a Malacha. And the Rebbe says, L'chura, it's not like that. L'chura, the Pasuk says, when the Eibishter commanded them to eat the Korban Pesach that year, he said, that the first day, which means the 15th day of Nisan, is Yontiv, and the 7th day is Yontiv, and it says don't do a malacha. And it was told then. So the Chura, you would think that year, when they went out of Mitzrayim, that day was Yontiv, was Osir B'Malacha. So the Rebbe says, their posik even though this posik where it says the first day is holy and the 7th day is holy, and don't do any malacha in them, that is written in Parshas Bay. So it seems like it's talking about when they went out of Mitzrayim. Musman aber sagt, na der posik redt nicht wegen Pesach Mitzrayim. You have to say that posik is not talking about that year, the Pesach that they went out of Mitzrayim. From Pesach Mitzrayim, because no matter what, Pesach Mitzrayim, the year when they went out of Mitzrayim, there was no 7 days, only 1 day. Brings from the Gemara. But that year, Pesach was only 1 day. And in the Pasuk steht doch Vayem Hashvi Mikra. The Pasuk says the first day and the 7th day. So obviously it can't go on that year because that year there was no 7th day. But on the other hand, you could say, well, the Pasuk says the first and 7th. You could divide the Pasuk. The first day, which is the 15th day of Nisan, goes even on then. And then when the Pasuk continues, the 7th day also is Yom Tov. That doesn't go on then. That goes on all the years later. Maybe sometimes we use the Lashon Litzdodin. The Pasuk is written, even though it seems like it's one hemshech, but really we could divide the Pasuk in half. So the Rebbe says, we cannot say this, that the Torah tells us two separate halachas, two separate dinim, which are not dependent, not connected. Number one, the first day it says you should be holy. That goes also on Pesach Mitzrayim. So it was holy then, and they shouldn't do malacha then. Then the second thing, when it adds also the 7th day should be holy, maybe that's all. That's shaykh. Only that is shaykh to all the later psachim, all the later Yom Tov Pesach. So the first pasuk is talking about both, then and all the years later. And the second half of the pasuk where it talks about the 7th day is talking only about later. You can't say that. While number one, because first of all, the pasuk state kol malacha le'yoseh bohem. It says first day is holy, the 7th day is holy. Don't do malacha in them. Das heißt, der Isser malacha für immer rischen, für immer schwie, werden beide nicht in selben Zivui. Not doing malacha on the 1st and the 7th is all within one commandment. So you can't divide the two. You can't say the first one is one thing and that's another thing. The idea of not eating malacha goes on both. And since the Pesach Mitzrayim for sure the 7th day wasn't Osir b'malacha, so the first day also wasn't Osir b'malacha. Number two, it's called malacha liyoseh b'hem shekim mechilta, and the words where it says don't do any malacha in them. And again, I'll read the pasuk again so you to know. Pasuk says Bayem Arishim Mikra Kodesh, Bayem Ashvi Mikra Kodesh. The first day is holy, the 7th day is holy, and it says Kol malacha liyoseh b'hem, don't do any malacha then. So the words Kol malacha liyoseh b'hem, don't do any malacha then, is written after the pasuk Bayem Ashvi. Thus, it's written after it says the 7th day. So the Mechilta says, according to the way it's written, I would think only the last day, the 7th day, is Osir b'malacha. Yontav Arishim 9, how do you know the first day? From the pasuk itself, you might say that it only goes on the 7th because it's the pasuk which says don't do malacha is written right after the word Bayem Ashvi. So the Mechilta says, Talmud Leimer Bayem Arishim Mikra Kodesh. But since the pasuk in the beginning says that the first day is also holy, so that teaches us the first day is also Osir b'malacha. So it comes out from Mechilta. The Mechilta says the pasuk itself is written on the 7th day. We have to have also a limud that it also goes on the 1st. So the main thing is on the 7th. From that we also learn out for the first day. Now, if the whole Isser Malacha starts from the 7th and also on the 1st, now Pesach in Mitzrayim, it didn't apply to the 7th as we said. So since the 7th day, which is the source of the Isser Malacha of Yontif, Pesach, is only talking about Pesach later on, and that's the Iker, and from there we learn out the first day. Since Pesach in Mitzrayim, the first day, the 7th day was not, so there's nothing to learn out from. So in Mitzrayim, the first day was not Osir b'malacha. And the third reason, Pesach Mitzrayim is Bechlal Nigeven K'yem Arishon, no Yem Echad. Pesach Mitzrayim, there was only one day, so you can't say when the pasuk says the first day, you can't do malacha. Goes also Pesach Mitzrayim. Pesach Mitzrayim, there was no first day. There was one day. When do you say first day? When you have a few days, then the first day is the first of all. But there was no first day, so the pasuk Bayem Arishon cannot go. So the Pashtas, when the pasuk says you can't do malacha, you can't do work on Pesach, did not apply to the time of Mitzrayim. The Mele, what he says in Yefei Toya, that it couldn't be that they did the bris at night because it was Yontif, and it's Osir b'malacha, you can't do the bris Shalei Bismano. In Pesach Mitzrayim, it was not Osir b'malacha. So you can't say that that was a reason why, for sure they did it before the night, because it was, at night was Yontif and it's Osir b'malacha. I feel the day of Ran, as a Pesach Mitzrayim is Yegim and Isser Malacha, even if we'll go, according to the opinion of the Ran, Sochim says that in Pesach Mitzrayim, when the Tesva of Nisan in Mitzrayim, it was forbidden to do malacha. So according to that, comes a kasha, how could they do a bris at night when it's yontif and you can't do a malacha? The kasha from Medrich, you still could answer the kasha. He says a kasha on the Medrich, it comes out that they did it at night when it's yontif, we could answer that kasha, even if it was osir b'malacha that night. The Rebbe is medaik in a word, in the way it says in the Medrich and Shir Hashirim Rabbo. And from that word, we have an answer how they were able to do the bris milah at night. What is that? In Shir Hashirim quotes a pasuk, there's a pasuk that says that they were all holding swords, they were trained to war. Each one had charbei al yerecha, had a sword on his side. So the Medrash quotes that pasuk and says, when Moshe said to them that you cannot eat from my korban Pesach because you didn't mal yourself, everyone took his sword that was on his side and he circumcised himself. Why isn't the gay that they circumcised themselves with a sword? The main thing wants to say, as soon as they heard it, they circumcised themselves. What's the difference with a sword or with something else? Number two, why does it say that each one took his sword? The mind of community to the cherev is einer or the mitzvah. What difference does it make if the sword is his or somebody else's? The meat That's verantwortet the Eben der Montescheile. Pashta, the reason the Medrash mentions this is to answer the question, how could he circumcise himself by Yontif? Why? Then is Mila Amloch Asura B'Yontif. When is the circumcision? In Malacha that's also on Yontif, is Iver Giton Kedarko. If you do it the normal way, you do that. And that is Beizemel. Beizemel is a kind of knife. By Mila, we have a special knife called Beizemel. Any Malacha that you do on Shabbos or Yontif is only Osir if you do it Kederech. Only Osir Kederech. If you do it the normal way, if you do a Shalei Kederech, a Malacha Shalei Kederech, it's not Osir. So my Mila, when is it Osir to do the Mila, which is a Malacha, only if you do it the normal way with a Nizemel. Or Mila B'Cherev is a Malacha Shalei Kedarka. But to do Mila with a sword is a Malacha not a normal way. Now, as a Malacha is Mutter Midaraisa. As a Malacha is allowed Midaraisa. And the Rebbe quotes in the Maramekhemis where we see that the Malacha Shalei Kedarka is Mutter Midaraisa. The Rebbe der Medrash or the Posik was a break. Madgish has Motzich Malgevem B'Cherev. That's why he mentioned that they did use the sword. The question was, why not? What's the difference? Is it a sword or something else? He wants to say that they could do it because they did it with a sword, which is not Shkederach, so it's not a Malacha. Then it's total Begestan Cherev Stam, but if it was say Stam that they used the sword, but Nachalzi can't mean, he still wouldn't be a good answer. We would think at the Retzach wegen Cherev and welchem Yizich Mal. Cherev could be a Cherev which is specially made for circumcision. Yes, there's a posik that uses the word Cherev by circumcision. It says by Yeshua when they crossed the Yarden. So Yeshua said, "Aseiloch Charev Surim, make yourself Charove swords, v'shuv Melos Bnei Yisrael Shenis, and circumcise the Eden again." He circumcised before they left Mitzrayim, circumcise again. So we see from here that we do use the word sword because there's a possibility that using a sword is also a normal way. The Hebrew is the posik matkish charbei. That's what the posik is, his sword. Zain cherev, the cherev from lumtim luchome, the sword of somebody who goes to war. That's not a sword that you used to be mal. So that's shalei kederach. That's what it mentioned. So what comes out from here, that the rayas that the Yivatayah brings, that this couldn't have been at night, because at night was the place that night was at night you can't do Mila, and also because it's Yontif and you can't do Mila at Yontif, both are not a question. At night is no problem because before Matan Torah you can do it at night if it's Shalei Bismano. The fact that it was Yontif, so there's no problem because it was Shalei Kedarka, so you could do it at Yontif. So in Mela there is no reason to say that it happened before. If so, the Pashas it happened at night. According to this, as a Pesach Mitzrayim, what man sich mal given by Pesach saying they circumcised at night, how der Kushe leduch. So the Kasha comes back. Why didn't the Eibishter make they should circumcise themselves during the day? Since it was the Eibishter who caused it, so why did they have to cause it in a way that it's mutter, but it's not the nicest thing because you see later the Torah Asad that means it's not so good. Why didn't he make it? It should be before the night. So Rebbe will explain that based on another teretz that the Achreinim the Svarim bring. If the Kasha v'yam zechid malgevem alayla. Another teretz how the Yidden did the circumcision at night. So we gave the answer before because it was before Matan Torah. But other Achreinim say another teretz. Now the Rebbe doesn't need the teretz. How could they do it at night? But the Rebbe will use that teretz in why the Eibishter made it should be at night. So they say like this: as the Nacht von Yetzias Mitzrayim is given, wie steht in Zeir and Eisen from Laila Kayem Yoyer. The Nacht of Yetzias Mitzrayim was so great that it was, the Zeir says, there's a possible Laila Kayem Yoyer, the night shined like the day. So B'meila, that night was similar to the day. B'meila, the Nacht had adin von Yom. So since there was such a great gilul, this is more a Chassidish teretz, but it's brought down in Achreinim. So the night was really shining like the day, so there is no problem with doing it at night, because the night is really the day. Fragment of them, but other Meforshim ask on this. If that night had the halacha of that's what we're saying, since it was so special, and Beruchnius, it shined, so it shined in halacha also. If that had a din of day, how did the Yidden do the mitzvahs that you have to do at night? Achilas Pesach, eating the Korban Pesach, matzah, morer, chulu, all the things have to be done at night. So they didn't do it in the right time, because if it had a din of day, so how did they do those mitzvahs? So the Rebbe says we have to say like this: the din von Yein Beleil Mitzrayim is when Norlik Abba Mitzvahs Mila. This that night had a din of day was not like Abba everything. Only like Abba Mila had a din of day. But not like Abba the mitzvahs are not concerning those mitzvahs. When the chiluk is verstandig the pashtas, and the difference in simple pshat, the Rebbe says only a few words here in pshat, and then he goes into chassidus. As he's given at Tzivi Mefurish, there was a clear commandment of the Eibishter, of them. and these things to do it at night. Ochles habosar balayla hazeh, osneichem chagurim. So the Pasuk says you have to eat Korban Pesach, you have to eat matzah, tomorrow it have to be at night. So since the Eibishter said it should be at night, so the gab of that, it had to be night because the Eibishter said do it at night, and if it have a din of day, they couldn't do it. So the gab of that has to be at night. And in the order 39, the Rebbe says, why Taka did the Eibishter make it? So he says, Hatam l'tzivu be'ifin zeh, the reason why the Eibishter made it should be night l'gab of those things, yeshleimer ke mitzvah seilu einen tluyi together lailo. These mitzvahs, Pesach, is not negated to night, the concept of night. What it had to be is when the 15th day of Nisan starts. Now, usually it starts at night. So it could be it had a din of day, but it was still the start, the beginning of the test of Nisan. So when the Torah says, do it at night, it didn't mean mamish night. It meant the beginning, which usually is the night of the next day, which is manach hapos l'chol echad kedislik. This is the time when they had to rush. Now, Gemara says something. What was the rush? Was the Eibishter rushing, the Tzriim rushing, the Yidden rushing, whatever it is, but the Eibishter wanted it should be at that time. So even though it was day, but it was the time of the rush, the time of the beginning of the next day, which was the time of the rush. So the Gabbat, those things, it didn't have a din of Yom, because it was Yom, but it doesn't matter because the Ikir is, it's the beginning of the day. But the bottom line is, comes out from here that Lagaba the din of Milah, the night turned into day. Not Lagaba the other things. The beer bepnimis in yonim. It was his mitzvahs Milah anders was nor Lagaba either did not give him a prince by the kadim yoyer. To explain, the Rebbe says why Epes was dafke by mitzvahs Milah, the special concept that it was really considered day, and not Lagaba the other things of that night. So he explains it like this. The Rinja von Yetzias Mitzrayim is in the ganze mit derech Pesach. The Rinja of Yetzias Mitzrayim came in the form of Pesach. The word Pesach, Tasha says, in order 40 brings Rashi, is dilug. Dilug means jumping. Jumping means when you jump, it means you don't go in a normal order. Go in a normal order is a Seder. Jumping is beyond Seder, which means Hecher from Medida Bagbola from Teva, beyond the limitations of nature. Which is, we could connect the Lachatchila River, but Ruchni, it means that it's a which is beyond Seder Ba'adragi, beyond normal. It's a jump, and that means beyond Teva. For Ma'pit Teva Hamidni Gikanta Ruzkim from Mitzrayim. It had to be that way. In order for them to go out of Mitzrayim, it had to be something done beyond the normal order of nature. Sai Begashmias, they couldn't do it. If you go nature, they couldn't get out, not for the physical reason. It says in Mechilte, Rashi brings that Mitzrayim was so guarded that nobody, not one slave, could ever escape from Mitzrayim. And here you want millions of people to go out. And naturally, it couldn't happen. Ruchnis also says, it says in Zayach Chodesh that the Yidden were beruchnis deep into the 49th gate of impurity of Tumah. So to get out of Mitzrayim, if it go naturally, even naturally beruchnis, wouldn't work. The Yidden couldn't go out of Mitzrayim. They were so low that they didn't deserve to go out. So when they went out, it was because there had to be something done which is higher in Teva. How could the limitations of nature become bottled down here? Because that was down here that they were supposed to go out of Mitzrayim. So there was a certain bottle the Medidis Vagbolas, Mitzrayim Megvulim, from ganz Seder Ishtalshlis. In order for something to happen down here, has to have a Ishtalshlis from the way things happen. Of everything down here is a reflection and a Ishtalshlis from what happens out in higher worlds. So if we needed to go higher than Teva down here, that means in the higher worlds, there had to be beyond the Seder over there. There's a Storim there too. I don't know if we call it Teva, but there are certain orders that happen there. And this was something beyond the order, beyond any Teva. So there had to be higher than also. Higher than any limitations. How does Mitzrayim go there? Mitzrayim means limitations. So there are limitations in the higher world. Whatever the limitations are, whatever the Seder of Shalshal has to be. So in order for it to happen down here, it has to happen up there too. Was das wird durch dem, was es ist mehr an was ist gamre hecher von kommen wieder bad bolem and call Seder Ishtalshus. In order for higher, in the Seder Ishtalshus should be something that's beyond the, so to speak, nature of Ishtalshus, has to be shining a light which is higher than Ishtalshus. A light that's higher than the normal order of the way the Eibusha sends down the air from one world to another. There's a certain order, but this had to be different. Had to be a Gilui Eir Milmayla, which is L'mayim Ishtalshus. Now, wie bald das alle Nyonim müssen kommen durch Teire, since everything that happens has to always have its channel through the Torah, so since we're saying there had to be Lamaila Mishtalshalis, the Gilui Eir Lamaila Mishtalshalis, had to be the same thing, had to start because in Torah, Darfan Zay Friya Zayn B'Torah, whatever happens Lamaila, wherever, has to start with Torah. Muz Eir Derinyan Hamshachas Heish Lamaila Mishtalshalis. So therefore, this fact that there has to be a Hamshacha of light that's higher than the Shtalshalis in order to be mevatel the limitations of Shtalshalis down here, free as on Torah, has to first be in Torah, which means in Torah that nimshech von ahecher nort vi Torah is mitzad atzmike b'yochel hecher from Judith from Torah. It has to be that there should be some hamshoche from a place which is higher than the limitations of Torah. We're trying to get an air which is higher than the limitations down here and higher than the limitations l'mayla. So there has to be something also at that time. David should be mamshich a hamshocha of air which is higher than the limitations of Torah. Now I want to stop here. We'll see it later in the sicha, but we shouldn't make a mistake here. What do you mean higher limitations of Torah? Torah is, if the Eibishter gave a mitzvah, the mitzvah cannot change. You can't say, well, sometimes there are changes in Torah. That's true, but we're talking about before Matan Torah. Before Matan Torah, there was a possibility that at certain points the Eibishter should change the hamshocha of Torah. The way that Torah is then, even though there are limitations of Torah, and it's Torah, and the Ovis knew the Torah before they learned the Torah, and they do the halachas, but still, at that time, there could be a hamshocha higher than the limitations of Torah because it's before Matan Torah. So there has to be at that time, in order for it to be the hamshocha of the Eir, higher than Teva, higher than the limitations of Teva, and higher than the limitations of Seder Shtalshalis, had to be higher than the limitations of Torah the way it was then before Matan Torah. The Riber der Rebishter gemacht, as Moshe Rabbeinu will übergeben dem Zivuk mit Kolorn lo Yichel bei Bitkedem Chashech Nardavke Balayla. That's what the Rebishter made. That Moshe should not give over this din that if you're not circumcised, you can't eat from the Korban Pesach. You should not tell him before. You should tell him at night. So the Yidden should bedafke have to do their circumcision, their milah at night. Nit wie es kommt noch Matan Torah arop and did the Torah. This is something that's not according to the limitations of Torah. So later on, these limitations came and you can't change it. That it can do milah at night. But before Matan Torah, that halacha wasn't there. And if the halacha wasn't there, there could be a change in higher and nishtalshlis of Torah. And the Eibishter wanted that should be. While the Gilu Eir was at Meir given Beis Alai, look at the light that shined that night, is given Be'etzim was his hecher from ganz Seder Nishtalshlis. There was a light, a spiritual light, that's higher than the Seder Nishtalshlis. These hecher from the Medida from Torah K'liyochel. And therefore it was also higher than the limitations of Torah. Because it had to cause the higher than Nishtalshlis, which is higher than Medida, higher than limitations. Und der Iber seine durch dem ist battle geworden, the Medidas from Seder Nishtalshlis. Since in Torah it was higher than the limitations, the Eibishter wanted to show that this Eir that's coming down is so great, that's higher than any Seder. So he made it bedafka, they should do it at night. That doing it at night is an expression of being higher in the Seder of Torah than the limitations of Torah. Because according to Torah, the way we see it after Matan Torah, it should be during the day, not at night. But the Eibishter wanted they should do it bedafka at night to express this nakuda that here there is a Gilui Eir higher than the limitations of Torah. And the Riber, therefore, seine durch dem is battle given the Medidas for Seder Shtalsha, since it was higher than the limitations of Torah, which is the Seder of Torah. So b'meila that caused there should be an Eir higher than the Shtalshalis, Seder Shtalshalis. There was an Eir which came down. But derech dilug, he said before, dilug means jumping. Jumping means there is a gap. It's not in the normal order. David made that. See, when Hamshachas Elokus in Eretz Mitzrayim, and we see it from another point, there was Gilui Elokus. We say it in the Agode. Nigla Aleim Melech Malcham Loch Makadosh Baruch Hu Golem. David himself revealed himself. And the Rebbe writes in the Agode from the Rebbe Rashap's Memorim that it was Gilui Atzmas in Sof came down. It was Hamshach in Mitzrayim, Vizi is Moli Gilulim. Mitzrayim, Rasha says, is full of Avodah Zarah. And Avodah Zarah could be no Gilui Elokus there. But that's only if you go in the normal Seder. Inside Seder Ishtalshus, Hodek Kenort. Inside Seder Ishtalshus, you can't have such a Gilui Eir, a great Gilui Eir, in a place of Moli Gelulim, or the Zorah. But because there was a Gilui of the Maila from Seder and Torah, so there was a Gilui L'Maila from Seder Ishtalshus, and durch them, is a battle given them, since it was all Beruchni is that way, so down here, Begashmius was also beyond any Seder Ishtalshus, which down here means besides beyond any limitations of Teva. She's given Pesach, Diluk, there was a jump. When she's given Yitzias Mitzrayim, Hepech Teva, there was able to be Yitzias Mitzrayim against Teva. So this answers the kasha. Kasha was, since it's better to have it at night, during the day, not at night. So why did the Eibush make it should be at night? It says the Eibush B'davka made it should be at night. Because that night was such a night which the day and night was equal, which means it was higher. What does that mean? Higher than Nishtalshel. There's no limitations. So there are no limitations of night. That's the pshat. It was Laila Kayem Yor. There are no limitations of night, higher than all these Tevadika limitations. And David wanted it should be dafke to show that way. It should be higher than limitations of Torah. The mele higher limitations of Ishtalshelis. The mele higher the nature down here. Punkt wie sagt, gemut sein der Inyan Adilik in Torah, but there soll sein, es kann sein in Tzias Mitzrayim. So now the Rebbe continues, just like we said, that in order to be a Tzias Mitzrayim, which is against Teva, there had to be a jump, which means higher than Ishtalshelis. With mele, we said before that had to be a jump in Torah. Azayat gedarf sein, by Eden an Aveda from Dilik Gemayel Ishtalshelis Ba'adam. So by Eden also had to be, because we know everything Lamaila comes through Aveda of Eden. So the Eden also had to behave in such a way which is beyond Teva. They should do something for the Eibishter beyond the normal Seder of the way Teva will expect. That's why the preparation to be able to go out in Mitzrayim, the Eden had to do two things. They had to have the Dam Pesach, the Korban Pesach, which is spits the Dam of the Pesach, need the Korban Pesach, and Dam Milah had to circumcise themselves. Why? Weil these two mitzvahs from Pesach and Milah zijn Avedas Shelamayla Magbola. These two mitzvahs expressed by a Yid that he goes beyond the limitations of nature. How is it? Pesach is Melosh and Diluk. Pesach itself shows, Pesach shows, the union of Pesach shows that the Yidden express them, their Diluk. I mean, it says all kinds of other things that the Yidden did by the Korban Pesach, that they went to Mesiras Nefesh, when they took the Korban Pesach, which is Avodah Zorah. The Rebbe doesn't say this here. I'm saying the Avodah Zorah of Mitzrayim. This is Mesiras Nefesh. So it's not just that the word Pesach is Diluk. The Avodah of bringing the Korban Pesach is jumping, meaning jumping beyond normal. It's not natural. This is, you need Mesiras Nefesh. Mila is in Yona Bris Eilon with Neighbor. Mila is also beyond nature. Mila is when you make a covenant forever with the Eibishter. An Eibike Verbund on Ken Shum Agbolas. A covenant forever without any limitations. That's like forever, no limitations. So Mila and Pesach both represent the Idz Aveda, which is, so to speak, Lamaylam and Ateva, and that was what brought about the Lamaylam and Ateva in Mitzrayim through the Lamaylam of Seder Ishtalshes and Lamaylam of Seder in Teva. This will explain why we find something special by Korban Pesach and by Mila that you don't find by other positive mitzvah, any other positive mitzvah. Bazei is a chiyuv of koros. That if you don't do it, you get the punishment of koros. Like this, we know that there are some mitzvahs loises, some negative commandments. The Torah says, don't do this, don't do that. The punishment for that is koros. Like it says, don't eat chometz on Pesach. If you eat chometz, you get koros. What's koros? The person, Rahman al could die at young age, and his children, and whatever he gets cut off from his neshama, whatever koros is, it's a terrible thing. It's a real cut off. But that's only by mitzvahs loises. Not by all, but by many mitzvahs loises. There is no positive mitzvah where the Torah says, do this and this and this, something positive, and if you don't, you'll get koros, with the exception of these two. By Milah, it says if a person doesn't do Milah all his life, he will get koros. Now then, it doesn't mean that young, but it means the other parts of koros. But it says a person is chayiv koros if he doesn't do Milah. And if you don't bring the Korban Pesach, also chayiv koros. Why is it? Why by Tafki, by these two things, there is such a punishment, the punishment of koros? So the answer is like this. When you're talking about something that's higher than any madreges, so then there is no in between. It's eins von the beide. It's one of the two. Or it goes beyond the shtal, means you forever connected to the Eibishter. Beyond any changes of time. No limit. If you don't do it, is then you get cut off. You don't have any connection to a lakus. See, when you have two things which are be'erech, not lamaila from Seder Shtalshel, it's you go straight with a Seder, but they're connected. Then you could say, let's say 1 to 1,000. 1 to 1,000 is very far, but it's connected. So therefore, there is in between. You have 500. 500 is in between 1 and 1,000. But between something and bleak wool, there's no in between. When it's bleak wool, there's nothing, or it's bleak wool or it's not. If it's not bleak wool, but it's just 1,000, it's not bleak wool, then it's not it. Same thing when it comes to doing something, the Mailam Yishtalshalis, then or you connect it if you do it, and if you don't do it, no matter what you do, you can't exist. Because if this inyan has to be the L'mayla Mishtalshelis, so your Mitzias has to be L'mayla Mishtalshelis. And if you don't do it L'mayla Mishtalshelis, you do it regular, and if you do it regular, not L'mayla Mishtalshelis, you don't have what that's supposed to be. So what's the other side? The other side is you get cut off. It's not you. It's not you, so you can't exist. Al derech baklolos Mitzias Mitzrayim canal, just like we said by the general idea of going on Mitzrayim. Es muss Arab genommen werden alle Medidas, die Medidas from Teire Kiviyochel. There we also say that all the limitation has to be taken off in order for them to go out of Mitzrayim, even the limitations of Torah, like we said before. Abe need, and if that wouldn't happen, and you'd leave it to nature, so not the pshat, you'd go out a little bit from Mitzrayim. Bleib bestecken in Mitzrayim. You'd be stuck in Mitzrayim. Eretz Malay Gilulim, be full of Gilulim. In other words, there we also see, it wasn't like, okay, you could have done a little bit less. No, anything you would do, not Bli Gvul, not L'mayla Mishtalshelis, wouldn't work. There has to be L'mayla Mishtalshelis. And if not, there's nothing. You're stuck in Mitzrayim. Same thing here. If a person brings the Korban Pesach, you're doing the L'mayla Mishtalshelis. That's what Eibishter wants. If you don't do it, you're stuck in Mitzrayim. There's no such thing, okay, so it's not so bad. So that's why here, there's Kodesh. Kodesh means there's no two ways about it. Kodesh means you must do it. There's no other way. Otherwise, you get cut off. The Pharaoh, the Gilu from Yitlaila Kayim Yoy by Yitzias Mitzrayim, the Darab Tov Mashayich Chasikis Mitzvah Smila. That's why when we say that year, that day was Laila Kayim Yoy, and the night shined like day, and we said before only was Lagabe Mitzvah Smila, that they could do it during the night because that night was like day only Mila. But they ate Korban Pesach, they ate matzah, they ate morer, and that Lagabe that Inyan, it was night. While the Inyan from Laila Kayim Yoy is in them Gilui Eir Shalamayla is verbunden mit Laila Kayim Yoy Naveda Vanidin. Because the Laila Kayim Yoy is connected to what the Yidden did. As we said before, in order for it to happen, that the Eibishter should make Laila Kayim Yoy, there should be the Gilui Eir Mayla Mishtalshelis and the Gilui Eir Mayla Meseder of Torah. Had to be because the Yidden in themselves do it, so it had to do with them. So therefore, the whole concept of Laila Kayim Yoy, which brings this idea that it's higher than Mishtalshelis, there's no limitations, is connected to Mila. Was Dosi the Aveda from Dam Mila? That's the Aveda of Mila. The Aveda of Mila is a Mayla Mishtalshelis. So Lagabe Mila, this caused the Laila Kayim Yoy Lagabe Mila. By the Korban Pesach, L'chura Korban Pesach also. Was by the Korban Pesach, there we have both. The Korban Pesach was brought during the day, and you're makriv during the day, and you eat it at night. So there, the Rebbe says it was because it had to be with Yudalad Nisan. The Rebbe says in the order, so that's what it has to do with Yudalad, and the eating was at night, and the Gabavat, even though it's not clear here, because the Rebbe says that both Sai Pesach and Sai Mila are both Aveda of L'mayla Mishtalshelis. And he says because of that, Lagabe Mila, there is a L'mayla Mishtalshelis of Laila Kayim Yoyer. But L'chuda Lagabe the Korban Pesach it's not. That's the question why Lagabe the Korban Pesach is not. So, Shaili, before the Rebbe mentioned that here, the Pesach, he mentioned the Pesach also. The Pesach had to be at night, but according to this, maybe the Pesach should also have been considered day. Like upon the Gabe Mila is one of the things that is more that you need the Mile and Ishtalshalis. And that child I'm asking, I'll look into it. This will explain also why the Gabe Mitzvahs Mila, there's a difference between the way it was before Matan Torah and after Matan Torah. Before Matan Torah, it could have been done at night, and after Matan Torah, it can be done at night. Why? Because the Emes Rinya from Diluk in Mitzvahs Mila is after the Mitzvahs Mila from Far Matan Torah. This whole concept that Mila is really the Mailam Ishtalshalis and Sagin of Diluk, it's more before Matan Torah than after Matan Torah. Why? There, it made a jump, not only from one extreme to the other, even beyond that. Took the Eden out from the domain of Klippe and brought them into the domain of Gedush of holiness. And in them Kufa, and in that itself, from one extreme, more than extreme, the deepest level of Sharatume, Memtes, the 49th level of Tume, till the level that the Eibishter himself revealed himself to them. But that's completely no connection. So only before Matan Torah, when it had to accomplish it, by regular case of Mila, which is Nachman Torah, is not that. Then it needed to do, in order to take the Yidden out from so low to so high, you had to have Mila, and the Mila had to be L'mayel Mishtalshlis. And Mila L'mayel Mishtalshlis means there is no Agbolas. You could do it day, you could do it at night, it's all the same, because it's showing there's no Agbolas. I shake it noch Matan Torah, I didn't geworden, and I ate the Tziyur, the Seder from Dush. After Matan Torah already, they were out from Mitzrayim, and now they started a normal order of Aveda. You can't always be L'mayel Mishtalshlis. To get them out, you had to be. But the regular, later on, the regular Derech Aveda. When the Bris Elam durch Mitzvahs Mila Zeichen Seder Kedusha, the fact that Bris Mila, we said before, is L'mayel Mishtalshlis, because it brings you a Bris Elam, but now that became part of the Seder. To become a Seder, a Bris Elam is part of the ordinary Kedusha. That itself now is limited, that this is the limitation. You have to do that. Therefore, there's a difference between day and night, etc., etc. Why? Because now this is part of Seder Ishtalshlis. They reached a higher Madrega, so now this higher Ishtalshlis could be Nimshach and Ishtalshlis. The Rebbe doesn't explain it here, but that's what he means. Later, after Matan Torah, Mila is still a L'mayel Ishtalshlis, because there's the of Nitzchi and the Bris Elam. But L'mayel Mishtalshlis, so to speak, almost became Ishtalshlis. Before Matan Torah, this had to be L'mayel Mishtal against them. Now that they came out already and they reached such a Madrega, now that could become a normal order of Kedusha. And now the Bris Milah has also limitations of Kedusha. Even though it's Be'etzem L'mayel Mishtalshlis, but in Lefi Erech, the Darga now, it's called Ishtalshlis. And B'meileh, there's a difference between day and night, so you can't do it at night. But before Matan Torah, then it was Mamish L'mayel Mehagbolas, there's no limitations. Therefore, then it was, night was like day. The order from Aveda B'Peil, the lesson we take from the Aveda B'Peil. The Aveda from Yitziras Mitzrayim, the Faran, and Muzayim, B'chol Day, B'day, B'chol Yem, B'day. The Aveda of going out of Mitzrayim, which means going out of the limitations, is every day, every generation, and every day. For Yeder Madrege is B'chinas Mitzrayim, L'Shem Mitzorim, M'gvulim, L'gab HaMadrege Shel HaMayla Mena. What's the pshat? Going out of Mitzrayim is going out of your limitations. So you always have to do it. What does that mean? I have certain limitations, which is, I have to go out of those limitations. So I go out today. The moment I go out from these limitations, even though it's considered beyond limitations, but that's only L'gabe, the limitations I had before. Now that I reached a higher level beyond those limitations, these Madrege now are limitations, L'gabe higher Madrege. So now I have to go out of the new limitations, from the higher level of limitations. So he says here, so every day, every moment, you have to go out of Mitzrayim. Every moment, you have to go higher and reach the level. Very good. You were left the limitations, you came to a new level. Now, these are the limitations. Now, you have to go higher. So, since you always have to go out of Mitzrayim, so when you go out of Mitzrayim, so you have to realize that when you go out of Mitzrayim, like in Tzias Mitzrayim, they went out, so there were no limitations then. You have to also have no limitations. So you always have to have no limitations, not even the limitations of Torah. And here we got to explain. It doesn't mean chas v'sholom that not limitations of Torah. The Torah says one thing, and I won't do it like that. I'll do it different because I don't have to follow the limitations of Torah. In this case, after Matan Torah, it means you have to be machmir. You have to go more than the limitations of Torah, not changing the limitations of Torah. The lesson is there that you have to go beyond limitations, even beyond the limitations of Torah. But since we know that Torah doesn't change, what it means is sometimes the Torah says you're allowed to do this. Go beyond that and don't do it. Even things which are permitted. Like they used to say, that a chassid looks at things like this. What you're not allowed to do, you're not allowed to do. And what you're allowed to do, you don't have to do. The other people say what you're allowed to do, you're certainly allowed to do. What you're not allowed to, a little bit, Chassidus teaches you not like that. So you have to go beyond the limitations of Torah even also. Al derech is mavoid in Tanya, like it says in Tanya, b'shas esretzich v'egen ever zayin chas v'sholom. If it's talking about going against, not doing the will of Hashem, which is Pchinas Golos Mitzrayim, which is considered this year in Golos Mitzrayim, is dan nitok echilut zwischen kala shebekalas and chamura shebechamuras. There's no difference between a light mitzvah and a strict mitzvah. That's the pshat, going out of the limit. Like this, there are limitations. Status that this is worse, this is not so bad. But if you go beyond limitations, it means that you have to look at every mitzvah just as important, even though it seems to be light. Because when we talk about Hashem's will, was his heche von tam vadas, afilu von tam vadas shalamayla. When we say Hashem's will Bechlal is higher than Seichel. So Lamail also by the Eibishter, when we say mitzvahs are the Eibishter's Rotzen, it's higher than Seichel. So when you look at the fact that each mitzvah is the will of Hashem, in all the mitzvahs life, they're all the same. So this explains the Barichas. It's not for here to explain that when it comes to Rotzen, if I want whatever I want, sometimes I could want something not so important, some important, but if that's what I want, mitzad the nekuda of Rotzen, they're all the same. That's what the Chazal say. Al tiyeshev v'shekel b'mitzvasei hashavteira. Don't weigh the mitzvahs. Kalish v'karas k'chamuras v'chamuras. They all have to be the same. So here itself it says that there are light mitzvahs, there are strict mitzvahs, because there are. This is koras, this is not koras. There are levels, but be'etzem you have to remember they're all the same because they're all rotzen. And rotzen's all the same. Das ruft aruisa fila by a kal shebekal, and that brings it. Even the person is a very low level. As a is ich meise nefesh. I feel if I dig the kal shebekal sof on ken cheshvenes. Sometimes you can have a yid who's not such a big tzaddik, and he'll go and say his nefesh even for a light mitzvah, something that the rabbanan made. I dig the kal shebekal sofrim. Why? Because he feels the rotzen of the Eibishter, and the rotzen of the Eibishter is not limited. That's what it means. That we have to learn the lesson to go out of our limitations constantly, even the limitations of Torah, but in this case it means limitations of Torah. This restricts the limitations of the Torah says only this and this is also. And you have to go further and do everything behidur, even more than what the Torah expects. But certainly you shouldn't think that there are limitations of day and night, which means beruchnius. You have to feel that there is no day. What does day and night mean, Beruchnius? Day means when the sun shines. It means Elokus is Vigilui. The sun represents the Eibishter. It says a posik. Shemesh Shemogan Hashem Elikim. Havaya Elikim. So the sun shines, it's light, means it's light. I see the truth. I see godliness. When you say night, which is dark, means on a level when I don't see. So we have to take, just like over there was no difference in day and night. So we take the lesson for us also. When we go out of the time every day in our level, there should be no difference in day and night. It makes no difference whether it's light to you, you're in a higher level, or it's dark. No difference. You still serve the Eibishter with the same way. Doesn't bother him that he's tired. You have all kinds of wills of your own. You have all kinds of desires. If you go beyond the limitations, then this won't stop you. So I'm in a dark place. It doesn't matter. I still could do it. And Rebbe uses these words, that you take out with strength. Strength means beyond your seichel. Because if you look from seichel, I'm tired now, so I shouldn't do it. You go beyond, and what do? You with strength, you take out Zayin Cherev, he takes out his sword, and right away you do the circumcision. Which means verbind sich mit dem Eibishter, you connect to the Eibishter durch Kiyum Retzeinei, by doing his will, with the level of Yesed, and connect to the Eibishter in a Bris Eilom. And you could do it even though you don't feel so good, just like that Yidden when Alom Madrege says they took out their Cherev and they do Milah, so Yid could do the same in the form of Laila Yoyer. Day and night is the same because you should reach and perform in a level of Lamaila Mishtal Shalas. And also the Ma'il Mishtalshalis of the Agbolas of Torah, but to go beyond that. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Shapiro.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
The sichas are not so simple sichas. What I used to do always is to
You do it so beautifully.
Here we go through the Seder that the project of the sichas is set up, so we're part of a whole of thousands of Yidden who learn the same sichas, and it's something very, very special.
Baruch Hashem.